Welcome to the Peep Show podcast.
Your glance at sex and social justice.
With Jesse and PJ Sage. Welcome back to another episode of the Peep Show podcast. This week we will be featuring two interviews. First, we will be talking to journalist EJ Dickson about her recent Rolling Stone article on waterboarding as a consensual kink. Next, we will feature an interview with performer Dahlia Dee, who will talk about performers' reactions to the new tube site launched by ManyVids.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Peep Show podcast.
Welcome.
We have two interviews today.
Actually, both people who we're interviewing today have been on previous episodes of the show, so that's kind of unusual and fun. I didn't think about that until just now, but that is the case.
Yeah, I suppose that is the case.
They're friends of the show now. Anyone who comes on twice is a friend of the show. Actually, I think that anyone who comes on is a friend of the show.
That's fair.
But we have special friends who make it on multiple times.
Well, in any case, today we do have EJ Dickson coming on for a new segment. But before we do that, we just wanted to cover something relevant really quick. There is a story that just came out of the UK.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I don't know how many years ago it was actually, but there was several years ago in which the UK came out with an announcement that they were banning particular acts in pornography. And those particular acts in pornography were fisting, squirting, face sitting, which to me, when I went down that list, I was like, shit, these are all the things that are like female centered. So while face fucking wasn't outlawed, face sitting was, which made me go,
Yeah, it's really seemingly quite arbitrary.
It's not arbitrary, honey. It's misogynistic and sexist.
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
It's like a divide between like what's happening to female bodies and what's happening to male bodies and who is the center of these actions. And when the center of the actions are male-bodied people or people with penises, then those actions are okay. And the ones that are more about female-bodied people aren't. And so, I mean, this is my read of the situation.
Yeah, I know it's your read of the situation. I think that there is an alternative read, though I think that your read is totally valid. I think
What is the alternative read of this?
Well, I think that from a certain anti-BDSM perspective, fisting is violent, which again erases the experience of a whole lot of women. But I would just like to point out that...
Do they understand that entire human beings come out of vaginas and that fists are not that big of a deal?
Hey, you don't have to... I'm not arguing in favor. I'm just pointing out that a lot of these laws were championed by women, or more specifically, anti-porn feminists.
Okay. All right. I hear you. So I think what you're saying is that part of the reason that those particular acts were outlawed was because anti-porn feminists, who were also women, thought that those acts being done on women in pornography was violence towards women.
Right,
Squirting, though? Like, what?
Well...
like, how? That's not even painful.
That's interesting, too, because the issue there is whether or not it's urine. And if it's urine, then it's obscene. And if it's not urine, then it's not obscene.
That's so stupid.
Yes. And so it's playing into these silly perennial debates, I guess.
Yeah, I still think that if they were really serious about that, they might think about other sorts of acts like face fucking.
Right. No, I totally hear you. I think your point is valid. Like, regardless of the intent, the consequence is to forbid a number of acts that many women do find pleasurable.
But on both sides, like, I'm not trying to like yuck anybody's yum. If you're super into face fucking, that's fine. But what I'm upset about is the fact that it seems to me that acts that are associated with women's pleasure are the ones that were being, I should say, because this got overturned, much more heavily censored.
Interesting side note to kind of support your point. I was reading a Guardian article earlier today, and they said that women are 40% more likely than men to search for squirt porn.
Oh, that's super interesting.
So that does seem to kind of support your claim there.
That makes sense to me because one of the things that's interesting about it is like that is something that your body does. I mean, but that's kind of how I interact with porn anyways. I just want to see things that I like or that I enjoy. So I'm a little bit egocentric in my porn consumption. But yeah, there's a way in which that makes a whole lot of sense to me.
In any case, it seems that these rules are going to be overturned in the near future.
I think they were overturned. The British Board of Film Classification confirmed that it has revised its own R18 standards in line with the new CPS guidance issued today.
I wasn't sure if it was just one case and it was going to be tested further, but okay, so it sounds like
it looks like
it's been changed across the board.
Yeah, they just changed it. And so now things like fisting and squirting are going to be allowed in porn, which also changes like how porn is going to be like distributed. So much of the porn obviously is created in the United States or in the context of the United States where things like fisting and squirting is allowed. And for a while there, weren't able to be distributed or posted in the UK, and now that's going to change.
Though they still have this porn verification system that has gone into place, but that's a discussion for another time, I suppose.
Yeah, let's count our victories where we can. I mean, we hardly get any good porn news, like ever. It's always really dismal and terrible. And I can be happy for a couple of days about fisting and squirting.
Fair enough.
I think we should go right on to our interviews.
Sounds good.
For our news segment today, we asked EJ Dickson to join us. She is a New York City-based writer who covers sex and the internet. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we read your article that you just published in the Rolling Stone on waterboarding called Waterboarding for Pleasure When Kink Violates the Geneva Convention. And we thought it was really interesting. And we haven't talked about these sort of like intense sexual practices on the show. So we thought this was
I guess we haven't really that much.
Yeah. So we thought it was a good
Kink is
opportunity.
a little underrepresented. So how did you decide to write this article in the first place?
Well, I follow a lot of sex workers and porn actors on Twitter, just as a result of what I cover. And I saw that somebody had tweeted about doing a particularly intense scene. I think it was the Tommy Pistol scene that I talk about in the article.
Uh-huh.
And I had never heard of waterboarding before I had seen the tweet. I had never heard of waterboarding being featured in porn.
Right.
And so I was surprised by that. And I was also surprised by the response where there was quite a bit of controversy and debate about the practice and whether or not it was okay to depict on film. So, I thought there's probably a story here.
Yeah. And were you surprised when you started looking into this?
It's hard for me to be surprised by anything people do when it comes to sex.
That's fair.
Honestly, and I feel like this is actually one of my weaknesses as a reporter is I'll file a draft of something, and I've had editors come back to me being like, you can be a little bit, not in this particular story, I want to be clear, but like in the past I've had editors come back to me and be like, you can be a little bit more arch and winking here, like this is a ridiculous thing, we don't have to take it that seriously. And I'm just like, well, I do take it seriously because people take sex seriously and people take their turn on seriously, and
right.
People are turned on by everything under the sun. So it's hard for, that's a long way of me saying that it's hard for me to be surprised by anything. So was I surprised that people are turned on by waterboarding? No. Do I think it's interesting that people are turned on by waterboarding? Definitely.
I had a friend who sent this article to me this week when it came out, told me that I should read it, and then started talking to me about her own experiences with waterboarding. And I actually didn't know that she had done that before. I mean, I know she's in BDSM and kink scenes and not in a sex work capacity, but just as like a civilian person who's into it. But I didn't know she did this specifically. And she told me that she thought this was one of the most satisfying sexual experiences she's ever had.
Interesting. Why did she elaborate on that?
You know what? I didn't really ask that. She just said that it was like an incredible experience and very, very intimate.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely spoke with people who said the same thing. I think that if you're the type of person who is turned on by a complete loss of control, this is sort of the ultimate form of loss of control.
Right. Yeah, and I told her, I was like, that's really interesting to me because I can't imagine in a million years wanting to be waterboarded. It sounds to me like, torture. And she's like, yeah, I don't think you would like it. But that's actually so interesting, the way that people have like vastly different desires too.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's also interesting that people experience it not only as a turn on, but like as you note at the end of your piece, that it also supports or facilitates a certain kind of relationship building in a way that allowing yourself to be vulnerable and to trust someone else to take care of you for a lot of people really creates feelings of intense intimacy. And I thought that was really interesting to look at it not only in terms of sexual desire, but also in terms of like emotional connection.
Yeah, that struck me as very interesting too. And what's even more interesting about that is in a porn context, these are people who are doing this who have maybe met, for the first time that day.
Right. You brought that up in the piece, and I thought that was something that's interesting to think about.
Yeah, which is not really, I don't think that's something that's necessarily encouraged in the BDSM community, especially for edge play like this. I think that most people who are pretty seasoned members of the kink community would probably say that this is something that you need to do with a trusted partner who you've played with for a long time. But I mean, in the context of these porn sets, it's this really intimate act, sometimes between two people who have never even met each other before, let alone pleasured, for lack of a better term, let alone had sex with each other.
Right. And in that way, aren't like really familiar with how each other reacts to these sorts of situations, or any sort of situation for that matter.
Yeah, they're not familiar with their boundaries. They're not familiar with their reactions, how much that they can take at a given time.
I guess it's the case, though, that the porn community is fairly small at the end of the day. And like you said, the community of people who are doing this practice is even smaller. So I guess what's different than the broader BDSM community is people might not have met before, but do know each other through reputation. And so I guess it's worth making that point, is that even if they're not personally familiar with each other, folks do have references and reputations.
Sure.
And even documentation of how they handle things and that sort of thing. So
that's a good point.
What has the response or reaction been since the piece has been out? Have you heard much?
No, not really. I haven't heard anything from people in the adult community at all, actually, which is surprising because that's usually not the case. When I write about the adult industry, I usually hear quite a bit from the people that I write about. But
I might suggest it's because the entirety of the adult industry is moving from XBiz to AVN at the moment and rather busy.
Yeah, sure, that's possible. I also think it's a fairly marginal practice. I don't think that this is something that a lot of people do. I was very surprised to see that a lot of mainstream performers whose names I recognized had done it. But I do think that it is still somewhat of a marginal practice. I mean, for the most part, the response was from my friends or people that I work with, like, oh my God, this is a thing? Wow, I had no idea this was a thing.
Right. So what was your kind of main takeaway from talking to folks who've engaged in this?
I don't think it's something I would be interested in doing. I was surprised by how open people were about it and how willing they were to talk about it. I think that it's extremely risky. I think that the people who do it regularly on porn shoots probably don't know the full extent of how risky it is. I am not sure if it is the wisest legal practice in the world, although I think it's fairly covered legally if you're filming it.
Right.
But there have been instances in the BDSM community where people have gotten hurt as a result of doing edge play, though not waterboarding specifically, and have been able to successfully sue others, consenting adults, as a result, even though both parties consented to the behavior.
Right.
Yeah. That was kind of one of the things that I was thinking about as I was reading your piece when you were talking about the fact that a place like kink.com has releases that models sign before they enter into any scene. So that's a little bit like they're protecting themselves. But in terms of like interpersonal dynamics, those contracts are a little looser and a little bit more dubious.
You mean if you're doing it in a private setting?
Mm-hmm.
I think so. And I would imagine, though I can't say for sure, that courts would be less likely to view those as formal and legally binding documents.
Right. That's what I was thinking about.
People don't typically sign liability waivers when they're engaging in private practices with one another. I mean, maybe if you go to like a dungeon, where you're
in
engaging
a public
in
space,
this sort of play. But in any case, I mean, the other issue is that, contracts aren't binding with regards to illegal activity, and contracts generally don't cover gross negligence. So even for the porn studios, I think, there's only so much protection that those contracts might have. And as you mentioned in the piece, I mean, if someone did want to sue, I think they could raise questions like, well, why didn't you have a medic on set and that sort of thing? There's certainly questions about negligence that could come up in that context.
I think that you're probably right about that. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say for sure, and I can't speak to the legal representation that these companies have, but
right.
I mean, that thought definitely did cross my mind.
Well, and in any case, like with most things with regard to the law, there's often a lot of open questions that only get settled if and when people bring suits to court and then set precedent, and if that hasn't happened, all we can do is speculate anyways, even if we were legal experts.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but that actually brings up, I mean, the fact that we're even having this conversation as like three non-lawyers speculating as to like liability for these practices also points to the fact that it's kind of on the far edge of edge play in the sense that there is so much danger wrapped up in this. Or
that
risk.
Probably
it's
can't
risky.
Be emphasized enough. It's a pretty marginal practice, but I mean, at the same time, I think it raises some really interesting questions. The thing that was most interesting to me about reporting it out, I guess, is not so much the legal aspect of it, which is pretty murky, but how we can take one act completely out of context and it is assigned totally different meaning. Yeah, like I don't think anybody would say that waterboarding as practiced by kink.com is a form of torture the same way that it is in a military prison camp. But when I asked these people, could you see how this could be perceived? How this, do you think that this should be
right? Absolutely.
Do you think it's right that this is outlawed in a political context? They all unilaterally said yes. They said this is a form of military torture. It's a good thing that this is illegal.
Yeah, well, I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, it seems really important and telling, actually, that
exactly.
the way that we experience and perceive and process trauma is really context dependent. And again, going back to those emotional relationships, I think that matters a lot. I mean, it's a very different situation when you absolutely don't trust the person, who is imposing something on you, as opposed to when you're expressing kind of complete trust in the person who is imposing something on you. And I imagine that the way that we ultimately experience and process that is radically different.
Right. Yeah. It's sort of an extreme example of how crucial consent is.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
I think it's also really interesting to think about the way that sexuality works to transform experiences into something entirely different. Like how powerful sexuality is, I guess I should say.
That you can sort of like derive sexual pleasure from something that another person would find totally asexual.
Yeah, that when it's not like put into a sexual context would be considered torture.
Yeah, not even another person, but you yourself or anybody under like a certain context, might find it to be incredibly painful and damaging for some people. And in a trusting, consensual context,
it can have a completely different character.
Yeah, might find it to be rewarding and enjoyable and, in the broadest sense of the word.
Yeah, I think something like waterboarding is pretty much proof of how significant context is when it comes to sexual pleasure.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Is there anything else you want to touch on in regards to this article?
Nothing off the top of my head, but thank you guys so much for having me on, and thanks for reading. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Where can people find your other work?
You can follow me on Twitter at EJ Dickson, Dickson, or visit my website, ejdickson.com.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We're here today with Dahlia Dee, who is a 7-year veteran cam model and porn creator looking to push the online sex industry into a socially acceptable, equal rights workplace, one Twitter fight at a time. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think you were on the second episode or something really,
Very
really early.
When we still really didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah. Well, I had talked to you, PJ. You were talking about, we're starting a podcast. I think, I was one of the first people to talk to you. So.
Yeah, you were.
That's right.
So it's nice to have you back.
It's nice to be back. This is awesome. I have so much to say.
Good. Yeah, that's why we had you back. Why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
Well, you pretty much covered most of it. My identity pretty much boils down to my cam life.
It's funny how that happens, huh?
Yeah, I know, right? For anybody who doesn't know who I am a BBW content creator. I make porn, I do camming, and I help train cam girls that are just getting started in the industry now.
Oh, you do? Wow.
Yeah.
Where do you do that?
I offer sessions through my ManyVids page on my store. And I've just recently, ever since coming back from the Taboo show in Toronto, I've had quite a few girls that have reached out to me that have wanted training sessions and stuff like that. So I've been helping other girls build their brand and their marketing.
You're a great person for that too, because you are full of knowledge.
Yeah.
I should hope so. It's been 7 years.
No, that's great. I didn't realize you were doing that. That's really cool.
Yeah. So if anybody has any questions, send them my way.
Yeah, definitely. We wanted to have you on today to talk a little bit about the shift that ManyVids has made.
Yeah, they included a tube site, right?
Yeah. And the surrounding drama.
Yeah, we want to hear all about that.
For listeners who don't know, because we're kind of talking about inside lingo.
Oh, sure.
But let's start with what a tube site is. Originally, ManyVids was just a marketplace where DIY producers could sell their clips directly to viewers, right? And that was what made it kind of stand out as a important DIY clip site. But then they moved into this tube space. And do you want to explain what a tube site is? For starters?
Yeah, so a tube site is essentially just a collection of free videos that either creators can upload. So when you get, bigger name porn companies such as Brazzers and Reality Kings and stuff like that, a lot of times they'll post their stuff for free or teasers of their stuff for free in order to get you to sign up for their website and that sort of thing. So tube sites would be anything like Pornhub, YouPorn, UJizz, RedTube, Xvideos, all of these things that you can basically go and watch porn for free. That would be under the umbrella of the tube site.
Historically, there was a lot of pirated content on those sites, right?
Yeah. So when everything made the shift from DVD, when porn, I know this sounds crazy prehistoric, but
when
back
people
in the old days when you could hold porn in your hands.
Yeah, right? Oh my gosh, that's so weird to think about. Porn was physical once upon a time. Yeah, so when the switch happened, from DVD to tube sites and to these collections online, a lot of people were ripping the files off of their DVDs or, pulling out sections that they really liked and stuff like that and showcasing them for free. So in the last couple of years, I feel like the affiliate programs for tube sites like that have gotten a lot better.
Can you explain what those affiliate programs are?
Yeah, so Pornhub, Xvideos, Xhamster, I think those are the big ones. They all have an affiliate site. So you can upload your own porn that you have made, that you star in, or that you've produced, that you have rights to. you can upload it and you get paid per 1,000 views. So it's a lot of us are moving towards that tube site model where we're uploading a lot of content for free, both to get like, you know, the notoriety from having our stuff on there and also, you know, to make some extra cash off of our content.
So that's pretty similar to YouTube, actually.
Yeah, it's almost exactly like YouTube. I actually feel like YouTube is almost like a copy of Pornhub. I don't know which one came first. So, I mean, YouTube came out with the payment structure before Pornhub and all these other sites did, I believe. But It's almost the exact same concept.
Right.
Let's go back then to ManyVids. So you were saying that ManyVids was different than the tube sites because what it did is charge people to purchase the videos.
Yeah, so if you wanted to sell videos or, you know, have people pay for access to the videos, then that's what ManyVids was for. And it was a clip site. And there's other sites like that, obviously, you know, like Extra Lunch Money, Clips for Sale. All of them follow that same kind of payment structure where you get paid for selling your videos to an individual rather than having a whole bunch of people view them.
Right.
So ManyVids recently decided to launch their version of a tube site called MVTube, which they touted as this huge ethical tube site for the underdogs. And they were basically trying to say that Pornhub and Xvideos and all of those other sites relied so much on pirated content, and they wanted to basically get rid of that, and they wanted to make it this big movement. Their whole thing was join the revolution and, you know, ethical porn.
Mm-hmm.
So they released this tube site on the assumption that we would all be okay with posting our content for free and not getting paid for it. No promise of revenue whatsoever. They weren't offering to pay us. Yeah, they weren't offering to pay us at all for the content that we posted, other than the top 3 models that got the most views over the course of a month were supposed to get like a $200 bonus or something like that.
But there's like 12,000 people on ManyVids.
Yeah, exactly. And ManyVids does not have the traffic to support that kind of model. So they launched this tube site and they basically said, post your stuff for free and maybe people will see your page more, which is super, super flawed for a couple of reasons. First off, a lot of models are of the idea that if there's a huge amount of free porn available on the same site where you would pay for your porn, why would you pay for it if you can use the same link to watch a whole bunch of free stuff?
Right.
And then, you know, in that case, it's like, yeah, maybe they find a girl that they like and they watch 2 hours of her porn and then decide to buy one of her videos.
Right.
But at the end of the day, is she really profiting as much as if all of her stuff was behind a paywall and they were just paying to watch her in general?
Right.
So a lot of people were concerned about that. And there was a huge outrage when ManyVids Tube was first announced. I was actually part of the Twitter fight that happened there, and everybody was commenting, you know, basically saying like, this is the stupidest thing we've ever heard. If you want to be ethical, like, you're so far behind the other tube sites, because at this point every other tube site had offered compensation for views.
Right.
So ManyVids was so far behind on this, and they tried to make it sound like they were being the good guys and all this other stuff, but they're basically telling us they want to rip off our content for free. So obviously we were not super pleased about that.
What do you think that the rationale behind that was?
So from what I've seen of ManyVids, I did go to the ManyVids loft in 2017.
Yeah.
And I got to meet quite a bit of them. And I've seen photos of like the insides of their offices and stuff like that. You know, I've chatted with quite a few of the people that actually work hands-on in ManyVids. Mm-hmm. ManyVids is not run by hundreds of employees. I would say that they have maybe, you know, 10 to 15 people, maybe a little bit more than that contribute on a daily basis to the site. So I feel like somebody had this, quote, brilliant idea. They have these great ideas, but they really don't consult with us on the ground to figure out if what they're doing is actually even relevant, because MVTube is not relevant. I'm sorry, it's not. Like, they've come into the space way too late. They've offered trash.
Like, in terms of payment?
Yeah, it doesn't have the traffic to sustain that to begin with. Pornhub, you post a video on there, you've got 5, 6, 7,000 views within a day. ManyVids, you post a video, it takes 5, 6, 7 days to come up with 100 views. So they really don't have the traffic to pretend like they're this great entity for tube sites.
Right, because if you're going to be a tube site, that assumes that you have a lot of traffic.
Exactly. That's the point of a tube site, right?
Right.
Is for people to watch the videos. And I think what MV is trying to do with that on the back end of things is I think they're trying to drive more traffic to their site. And they've decided that the way to do that is with the tube, because they've seen the success of other tube sites, but I don't think they're quite grasping what it takes to make a successful tube site.
Right.
And people just don't really want to watch porn on MVTube. It's not well organized. The search function doesn't really work that well. And then on top of that, all the models were super pissed about it to begin with.
Right. That's my takeaway is it just was kind of a confusing interface the little bit that I looked at it. I was sort of like, what's going on here? Like, how do you even find stuff? I guess I never figured it out. And I wasn't sure if that was just me or if that was just the design of the site.
No, that's absolutely the problem that that a lot of people have been having. And if you look at the comments when MVTube was first released, so many comments were saying from clients, not just from cam girls, but from clients were saying, there's so many problems with the site already, and now you're just going to add something to this. And, nobody was happy about MV2 when it came out. Like, nobody thought this was a good idea. I've been with ManyVids almost since they started. They were probably a couple of months old when I signed up.
Do you have a sense of how long ago that was?
Oh, gosh, I don't know.
It's been a few years. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been maybe 4 years, 5 years, something like that. Maybe 4. I think they're a little more recent than that. So it's been a good number of years. And it honestly feels like they built their little MV house, and that worked out really well. So they added another wing to it without fully finishing renovating the main house.
Yeah.
And then they just kept adding and adding and adding and adding and adding. And now it's just this giant castle of bullshit. And
that'll be your poll quote.
Yeah, really. So, I mean, they have these great ideas, and, I feel like one of their 15 people at the table when they're having meetings is like, hey, check out this great idea. And without actually fully fleshing it out, they just kind of throw it onto their house. I mean, there's some pretty good ideas in there that they've tried to launch, but at the end of the day, they've kind of just tacked it on rather than fully integrating it with the site. Things like, if you have like a model account, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but if you go through your dashboard, like the list of things on the side, they just kept adding different tabs instead of organizing things where they should be.
Right.
There's like 50 different tabs that you can go through, and each of those has like 10 little sub tabs.
ManyVids came on the scene kind of in the wake of tube sites wiping out the kind of the old school porn model, like studio porn model, DVD porn, big porn studio sites. I mean, some have managed to survive and make like really lean productions and still function in this day and age, but definitely mainstream has taken a big hit, and a lot of that has to do with piracy from these tube sites. And ManyVids came on the scene as a pretty interesting reaction to that by allowing DIY creators to have more direct interactions with fans and to sell videos more directly. And it seems just their whole model was about competing with or as an alternative to tube sites. So to launch a tube site is definitely curious because it seems like that was the very thing that they were trying to challenge or create an alternative to.
Well, when MV was first released, tube sites didn't have as much for content creators.
Yeah.
Now it's like they've come into this realization that if they pay people, even if it's a minuscule amount, people will post, and that's where they get their content from.
Right.
So it's actually working out very well. And I think ManyVids saw that and was like, oh, we can jump on that, which is honestly very disappointing because the CEO of ManyVids was herself a cam girl.
Yeah.
You'd think that she would maybe want to discuss some of the things that she's about to do with other cam girls before launching them. And I mean, it's not like it would be very difficult. Send out a survey to 100 models on the site.
Right.
Like you have the resources to do that. So I don't understand why none of this stuff was beta tested with any of the people on the ground. So that was pretty disappointing when the first wave of MV Tube announcements kind of came out. We were all pretty pissed about that.
Yeah. So you said that you were one of the first people that started tweeting about it and that it had a response that you didn't even expect. Like, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, so when they first launched and they first had their model that they weren't going to pay us, I mean, I'm pretty vocal about stuff like that, which honestly with ManyVids is difficult because they have a really bad history of just blocking people that say anything bad about them.
Oh, wow.
When they first launched, they would just take high-end cam girls' photos and put them on their site and basically imply that those girls were working for ManyVids, even if they weren't.
Whoa, jeez.
Yeah, a bunch of girls were finding their image and all this other stuff on ManyVids and being like, what the fuck? Like, I don't work for this site. What is happening? So they got a lot of backlash and a lot of outrage from that. And I mean, any clip site is going to get their fair share of negative attention at the very beginning because we're testing them out. We're putting them through the ringer. We're basically going to see if they're going to survive, right?
Right.
So a lot of people were speaking out about that, and a lot of people were, tweeting to them saying like, can you please explain this? Like, what is going on? How could you possibly like steal other people's stuff and, not pay them for it or anything like that? And they didn't reply. They would just block people. And that's kind of shown up quite a few times over the years when there was that whole scandal with certain cam model that was making inappropriate content.
Yeah.
And that was the same thing. Anybody who spoke out about ManyVids would get blocked. That sucks because that's a huge form of support from the site.
Oh, right.
You can tweet at them, right, and they'll resolve your support issues 9 times out of 10.
Yeah.
And like, I'm not trying to talk badly about ManyVids. Like, that's it's where I have a huge amount of my fan base. That's where I sell most of my stuff. But at the end of the day, I just want to see them become better. And I feel like there's a lot of things that they've really done wrong. When they first released MV2, but yeah, like I was one of the first people that was like, whoa, this is bullshit. And I commented on their blog post on the actual site as well, giving them, my thoughts and my feedback. And like I said, it's really disappointing to see that they didn't ask for that feedback ahead of time because a lot of this could have been avoided.
Yeah, you would think they would get more buy-in from the people who are actually using the site.
It was so overwhelmingly negative that ManyVids took this into consideration. And they had this big announcement the next day. We heard your concerns. We listened to you. Now you get 60 cents per 1,000 views on all of your content. It's pretty important to note, though, that there was no like asterisk. There was no fine print. It was just that was how they presented it, is that every 1,000 views, you get 60 cents.
Yeah. Okay.
And so everybody was pretty surprised, first of all, that ManyVids took that step so quickly, but we all kind of just assumed that it was such a huge community outrage that they really wanted to kind of settle us down. And so they were really offering something that sounded too good to be true. So we were all pretty satisfied with that. And I uploaded a whole bunch of videos just as like a tester. I was like, I'm going to get to my first 1,000 views. And then I'm going to see like where it goes on my earnings, if I can see it in my dashboard, where I go to check on this. At the end of my month, I had 1,220 something views.
Okay.
On these couple videos that I had uploaded. And so I saw that my 60 cents went on to my payout and I was super happy about that. And everything was good. And then the next day was January 1st. I was looking at my views, trying to see like, how many more views I need to hit the next 60 cents. And I noticed that they were all gone. And so I was super confused about that. So I took a screenshot of it and I sent it to their support team. And he says, oh, let me clear this up for you since you're clearly not understanding.
Oh,
that was my
so it's like condescending too.
Condescending.
Oh, yeah. So that was my first red flag. I was like, uh-oh, here we go. And then he like copy and pastes this blurb that says essentially that ManyVids views don't roll over. At the end of every month, they reset to 0. So if you don't hit that 1,000 views, you lose them, essentially. When I found that out, it was instant fury. I took like screenshots of everything. Nobody knew that it was resetting
that is the intuitive thing. You wouldn't expect it to not roll over.
Exactly. Like that would just be the assumption. And that's what I think they were trying to make it seem like when they first announced MV's payment scheme for this. So they were very deceptive in how they did that. And I feel like again, those, 15 people went and sat at their meeting table and they were like, how can we make it so that these guys are happy without actually have to paying them for their views?
Right.
Because ManyVids, they probably can't afford it at this point. They don't have enough traffic that's unique to MVTube to actually pay out their models properly. Like I feel like they're really taking a hit with having to pay people for MVTube.
Then maybe they should have waited until they could afford it.
Exactly. That was one of the huge points.
In terms of this model, so were these views, I understand they rolled over each month, but is it 1,000 views total for all of your videos on
Yes.
MVTube or for each video?
It was for all of your videos.
Okay.
So say, 2 of your videos each get 500 views, you would get 60 cents.
Gotcha.
It's not only that you're not going to hit payout, that's bad enough on the MVTube sites, but it also probably is pulling business away from the clips that you would have sold. So,
Exactly.
Clip sales are down and you're not going to hit payout.
I mean, if we step back for a second, most models already have somewhat free teasers in their profiles. Mm-hmm. Almost every one of your videos has like a 10-second free teaser or whatever. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's not like people are buying porn sight unseen. Like they have a sense of what they're getting already. And if they visit your profile or if they're just looking at the feed of the recent sold stuff or whatever, even without MVTube, they were already kind of getting teasers.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. But the second thing, and I think the more important point about why this is troubling is that, the way that the tube sites work is before they ever monetized or offered payouts, they were already giant. And for better or for worse, they were built on exploitation and piracy and ripping people off.
Absolutely.
And only later came to the table and decided to offer money after they were already tremendously rich and had huge traffic numbers.
I get what you're saying is that, they built everything on piracy and they waited to introduce a payment program. But I'm almost glad that they did that, because if they had launched a payment program since their inception, it would never have been as lucrative as it is now. So I'm kind of glad that, I'm not glad that they stole all this stuff and pirated all this content, but at the same time, I'm glad that they waited until they were big enough to actually have something to offer, where MVTube has nothing.
Right. And I guess that's that was why it works, or that was the only way it was going to work. Unless
Absolutely.
you had somebody just with huge amounts of like venture capital or whatever. But
that wants to invest in porn.
And it wants to invest in porn, exactly. But like barring, that scenario, it's hard to imagine how they could have gotten off the ground otherwise, even if it really sucked, and we can still really hate them for it. But I guess what's complicated with ManyVids is that people already are making money on ManyVids and already selling clips on ManyVids and have a presence on ManyVids. And what MVTube is asking them to do is, say you have a clip that, you're selling 5 times a month for $5, and you make whatever your cut of that $25 is. So you make $15 a month off of that video. But for you to generate $15 a month off of that video on MVTube, to make the equivalent of $5 sales each month, you'd have to get something like 150,000 views, which is probably some significant percentage of their total views every month, right? It's just impossible. It's annoying that it resets, and I get the frustration with all of that. But the problem, I think, too, is just that it seems like even if it didn't reset, it still seems like impossible for you to make the same kind of money on your clips that you're making selling them on the conventional MV site, because they just don't have the traffic to make that model work, right?
Absolutely. And that was like a huge thing that came up too. The Microcam's model, Amber Cutie, had actually pointed that out. Pretty much word for word what you just said is that it's not worth it. Like, even if you have enough views to make your 60 cents, that's 60 cents. That's like nothing. Like, the effort that you are putting into making this video is not worth it.
Yeah.
You would be better off making a shitty masturbation video and selling it for $3.99. You'd still make 10 times more money than you would from MVTube, especially at this stage in their traffic game.
Right.
I just want to go on to like the resolution that they offered, because this whole thing was actually pretty hilarious.
Yeah. Okay.
So eventually, this whole tweet blew up like crazy, and all these people were outraged. And, I'm sure MV support was getting so many emails because so many people were posting like screenshots of their conversations with support, like confirming what I had said. And eventually ManyVids and Bella French herself actually got involved. And this is where the shit show becomes. So she commented And she said, oh, we're so sorry. We're going to fix this. And I'm like, how do you fix this when you have knowingly deceived every single one of your coworkers, essentially, the people that work for you, your employees?
Yeah.
You've deceived us at this point. You listened to our feedback from last time, and instead of taking that into consideration and fixing it, you found a way to go behind our backs and not pay us, even though you said that you were paying us.
Right.
So that was my point. So then she said, this will be fixed. I'll comment again in a few hours. So she, took her time or whatever, and they had like this late night meeting. And that was one of the things that she said is, oh yeah, we're going to have this late night meeting. We're going to get the crew together. And I was like, yeah, but it's like 10 people. And she said, we're going to get everybody together and we're going to discuss options for this. So what they eventually ended up coming out with, and what the current model is right now, is rather than 60 cents per 1,000 views, you get 1 cent per 15 views. So it actually works out to 69 cents per 1,000 views, but it still rolls over. So now the most you can lose is 14 views rather than 999.
Right.
But you can still lose views.
Right.
That you're getting paid jack shit for. Right. So this whole thing just makes absolutely no sense. But that's how things stand right now, is that, for every 15 views, you get 1 cent in your MV account.
Yeah, I'm really curious about what the most any model has made in a month on NVTube. I can't imagine it's that much. I can't imagine it's even in the ballpark of what top models make on cam sites or on like the main MV site itself.
So if you go to the number one person right now and then sort it by MVTube, the top person has about 230,000 views.
Which is actually pretty good. It's not insignificant, and it's halfway through the month. So say you get 500,000 max, right? Like that's the absolute best you could do in a month. I think if I'm doing the math right, it's about $333 if you have 500,000 views. It's not like insignificant, but there are cam models who make that in a night. It's smaller than what the like prizes are for being one of the top models on the main MV site.
Realistically, like your average cam model is probably only going to get maybe a couple thousand views a month.
Right.
Like if they do really, really well, like maybe 100,000 views, but like that's what, $60?
Yeah.
60.
Something.
Yeah. But like that's just not worth it.
All right. Well, thanks so much. Where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at XO Dahlia Dee, or on Instagram. My new account, since my old one just got blown up, is at XO Dahlia Dee Backup.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. I remember
that
seeing that you had to build a new one.
Yeah, just more examples of people taking us down because they don't like boobs. So
it's so sad.
Like all of our problems boil down to that. Pretty much.
Well, thank you so much for hanging out with us today.
Of course, anytime. I'm always happy to come and chat with you guys.
Thank you for joining us for yet another episode of the Peep Show podcast. I'm PJ Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at PeachSage.
And I'm Jessie Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at sapiotextual or at jessiesage.com.
We would like to remind you that we have a Patreon account and would appreciate your support. Please visit patreon.com/peepshowpodcast. Our music is courtesy of Joe Kennedy. The show was produced by Jessie and PJ Sage.
Signing off. Have a great week.